Hey, I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics, usually, not this time, but usually 1 week after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. And in each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan, and then also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything that I talk about, so be aware this is your first and only warning that many spoilers lie ahead. I am catching up right now on the comics that came out while I was kind of on break, so this week I'm going to be covering the comics I haven't talked about yet that came out in December, and then next week I'll catch up on what's come out in January so far, and then we should be back on the regular weekly schedule just talking about the comics that came to the Ultra tier the week before. So anyway, even though, there's multiple weeks to catch up on in December, I ended up, rather than just overwhelming myself and then making this segment extra long, I just zeroed in on 3 comics that I really found engaging and that I thought I would talk about. And the first of those is Wonder Woman #3. Now, I've really been enjoying so far this series that started with issue 1, of course, written by Tom King, and just the way that they're placing Wonder Woman as this sort of alien in the cultural sense in America, and how the America is at odds with the Amazons. There's been a murder multiple murders seemingly committed in one incident by an Amazon that has the country just up in arms or afraid or both, and Amazons are being deported out of the country, and Wonder Woman is sort of the representative of the Amazons to the world, and an ambassador of peace, of course, from Themyscira is trying to sort through this. And so, but in the midst of all that, we've got this dark evil kind of working in the background, manipulating things, that is likely responsible in some way for what has happened. Now, at the end of issue number 1, throughout the issue, we'd been seeing these blue text boxes with a mysterious narrator that turns out to be this being called the Sovereign, who is in some way an old man, old to the point of being decrepit almost, who has this black lasso of lies, which would seemingly be the antithesis to Wonder Woman's lasso of truth. And this Sovereign, in some way, sees himself as the king of America and part of this dynasty that has ruled America for many years. And so, and it would seem that he is in fact a manipulator of some kind, and is in some sense perhaps ruling America, or manipulating, influencing America to the point of having some power over America. And so that narration continued through this issue. It was a little bit confusing, just going a month between reading these. I was like, okay, who is this narrator again? But as this narrator was talking in previous issues, it seemed to imply at one point that it was instructing, as the narrator, the Sovereign, talked about Wonder Woman, was instructing someone in who Wonder Woman is and the history of her and the Amazons and whatnot, and referred at some point to the unknown person that the narrator is speaking to their mother. And now I briefly thought, oh wait, is that supposed to be Wonder Woman? But it seems it's actually referring to this Amazon Emily, who is supposedly responsible, I think, for these murders. Anyway, I'm reminded, getting back into comic books, over the last year or two, that it is sometimes tricky to go a month in between stories that really don't spoon feed information to you. You have to really sometimes go back and reread, which I apologize I haven't done. And maybe I'll get better at that in the future. But this mysterious daughter of an Amazon seems to be the focus of this backup story at the end, which I'll talk about briefly before the main story. This backup story, it takes place, it says a few years from now, and it features John Kent and Damian Wayne, and I'm a little bit confused about the chronology. Some of it I could just kind of shrug and say, well, it's the artist's interpretation, but I know that in Batman and Robin, I believe it is, Damian Wayne is now being enrolled in high school. Okay, so he is at least 15 years old. And now this is supposedly taking a few years from now, at least 3, possibly 5, if the child in this backup story, this young girl with super strength that clearly has some kind of connection to Wonder Woman, if this child is the Amazon in question. This child is supposed to be 5 years old. And right now in Wonder Woman, the story is referring, I think, to the baby as still being in the Amazon's belly, so having not been born yet. So I'm trying to connect the dots here. And I'm like, okay, well, if this flash forward a few years from now features a 5-year-old girl, then it's supposed to be probably about 5 years in the future, at least 3. And Damien does not look 15, 16. He doesn't look 18. He certainly doesn't look 20. And so I'm just like, I think the editorial teams need to talk to each other a little bit here. But don't get me wrong, I don't want Damien to grow up. I don't like the idea of him being enrolled in high school. And John Kent is actually written in his dialogue and in his behavior, and arguably in the way he's drawn in the art, to not be 3 years older than he is, to actually be a little bit younger than he's portrayed, having been kind of artificially grown up in the pages of the Superman comics. That said, I like that they're leaning into this relationship between John and Damien. I liked it when they were the same age and they were kind of like figuring out how to grow up as the sons of these really well-known superheroes. I will say again, I am very unsatisfied with the aging up of John Kent, and we can even set aside the bisexual thing. I just think he's much more interesting as a boy, as a child, than as an adult, you know. So, and I think that I'm getting mixed messages from DC because I feel like there's a number of stories at DC that are really wanting or almost wishing that John Kent was younger. They try to write him younger, write stories about him when he was younger. And I just wonder if the decision to age him up was power given to Brian Michael Bendis because he's such a superstar writer that actually a number of other people at DC wish hadn't happened. I don't know. That's we may never get the inside story on that. But anyway, yeah, I mean, the backup story, it doesn't really do much for me other than like, oh, it's neat to see these two working together, and oh, I guess this little girl is going to grow up and be an Amazon someday. I would rather the pages weren't filled with this story and we just gave every page to the story about Wonder Woman in the present day. But anyway, that's all I'll say on that little backup story for now. As Wonder Woman goes to visit Sergeant Steele, who's kind of like the head of the military operation that's going up against her and the Amazons, I like the way that she's written. It's a bit inconsistent from how I've seen her dialogue read in many other stories. It's almost like she doesn't use contractions. Her speech is a little bit more stilted or formal or something like that, but it plays up the fact that she is not, you know, a corn-fed, born and raised American or whatever. She is from another culture and comes from a different way of speaking, maybe even, you know, from a different language, arguably. And so I just like making her a fish out of water. That's something I've liked from the very beginning of this new series. I love the fish out of water device in general, and I think it's a great fit for Wonder Woman. But at the same time, her strength is really played up. The art really plays up her physique, that she actually towers over most men and is drawn to be beautiful, but at the same time has these really, you know, almost kind of masculine broad shoulders and really defined arms and muscles, you know, but not grotesquely so. It's a great combination of, visually speaking, that represents both strength and beauty for Wonder Woman, and I think that you can lean too far in either direction, and what I'm seeing here is for me a nice balance. And I see that not only in the way she's drawn, but in the way that she's portrayed. Even as she leans over this desk and is a 1/3 of the way toward hulking figure over this man that's kind of like the receptionist at the front office or the front desk, you know, she is imposing, but the expression on her face is very gentle. And I just appreciate that juxtapositioning. I think that's one of the most interesting things about Wonder Woman is her softness and her strength at the same time. Anyway, in visiting Sergeant Steele, she's trying to get the information that he's discovered in his investigation of this whole situation so she can also kind of employ her efforts to bring resolution to it as well. Initially, he's not wanting to work with her, and so there has to be kind of a show of strength and all that kind of stuff. Eventually, he turns over the information that he's discovered, although we don't get the full blowout of what that is. That'll clearly be waiting for another issue. Thematically, a moment that I found interesting in this issue is as the Sovereign is kind of working his designs means behind the scenes to manipulate one of the soldiers that had kind of a face-off with Wonder Woman, and basically they ended up retreating. He was just kind of happy to survive, going toe-to-toe with like a superhuman being. But his encounter with the Sovereign had him hold the lasso of lies and then started kind of feeding him lies and trying to really change his mind to have a different perspective on his encounter with Wonder Woman, where this soldier was originally kind of content to just like, yeah, I'm just glad we lived another day. He was like, yeah, but it seems to me that actually that was a much bigger deal for you, that it was actually a devastating experience for you. And he goes on to say, the way she fought you boys, it undermined your manhood. This woman robbed you of your own gender. Who are you then? You're so confused, it hurts you deeply. And I just found that very interesting. Now, this is the voice of the villain speaking, and so we have to, we don't have to, but it's interesting to me to try and determine, okay, so it's the voice of the villain, we know he's feeding him lies, but which part is intended by the writer to represent lies, and which part is just truth that's kind of mixed in? The Sovereign says that by basically beating the army that came to face her, Wonder Woman robbed this soldier of his own gender. And so that would seem to suggest, first off, that a man is defined by his ability to be victorious physically, to get the upper hand, to be stronger physically than someone else, than perhaps a woman. I think that many would agree that physical superiority over a woman is not something that is required in order to be a man. I am fully convinced that I could sit down with a woman who had done a lot more exercising and building of her biceps than I have, and she would just destroy me in an arm wrestling match. But I would nevertheless still be male. I would still be a man. And not only that, but I would still be who I am, because my sense of identity is not meant to be based on my gender or my sexuality. Unfortunately, there's a lot of mistaken thinking about that today, that our identities ought to be tied directly and dependent directly on our gender, our sexuality, and how we view those things. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, does the writer here, by putting these words in the mouth of the villain, is he just kind of calling into question this wrong idea of what a man is, or is he also at the same time saying that, you know what, the villainous ideas in our culture today would tell us that our identity is dependent on gender? He doesn't come out and say that. I think we'd have to sit down and talk to the author about what their view is. But the idea of someone's identity being tied to their gender coming from the mouth of a villain, and their wrong way of thinking, that actually is very consistent with reality, according to my own worldview. Well, the Sovereign manipulates this soldier to the point where he agrees. He says, I didn't feel like I was a man anymore. She took that from me. I don't know who I am. So in other words, he's saying, if I don't feel like a man anymore, I don't know who I am. So again, directly tying gender, sexuality to his identity, and we're seeing this as a negative thing, or at least in a negative context. And he feels this pain so greatly and this confusion so greatly, again being manipulated by the lasso of lies, that ultimately he kills himself. And I would assume that we're going to see the fallout from that in issue number 4. So yeah, cool stuff going on in the Wonder Woman right now. Also in Justice Society of America, written by Jeff Johns once again, and we're looking at issue 7 right now. And I was a big fan of the Jeff Johns run back in the mid-2000s, and so to see him come back to this title, not just because I enjoy him as a writer, but also because he's clearly pulling from his previous run, that's really gratifying to me. For example, in one scene, they're visiting, what's this guy's name? The Icicle, a villain of the original Justice Society of America who was featured in Jeff Johns' previous run, is now being recruited to help them with their current stuff they have going on. And I just love that callback. He was at the time a kind of a revamped, recreated version of the character that Jeff Johns brought out of the Golden Age, updated a little bit in some cool ways and made relevant again. And I just love JSA being used as a vehicle for that, for dipping into the past, taking things and kind of making them modern and cool while still kind of respecting the past. Speaking of the past, Dr. Midnight goes to visit Jean Loring, who, if you don't remember, was the wife of the Atom, who was, well, gosh, can I give spoilers for Identity Crisis? Anyway, she was a major player in Identity Crisis. And to see her being brought back, I felt like she, after that, was used a little bit here and there. She kind of became Eclipso for a while and then faded out of the way. I felt like other writers didn't necessarily know how to consistently leverage her, because Identity Crisis was a dark story. Her part in it is very dark. And so maybe they were kind of wanting to ease off of that. They made her into a little bit more of a traditional comic booky type of character. So the fact that they're having this sit-down conversation in Arkham Asylum, and that she clearly has some issues still with her husband, is showing, some darkness and some insanity to her. I mean, what a broken situation that she is right in the middle of, and a tragic situation. And I would love for them to bring her back into the story in a significant way, because I appreciate the drama and the heaviness that comes with a character like Jean Loring when she's leveraged the right way. And that can still be done with her playing Eclipso, this kind of almost cosmic level baddie, as long as you bring it back down to that ground level, tragic, emotional core that was established for her as a character in the pages of Identity Crisis. So anyway, I'm really on board with at least the potential of having Jean Loring back in the pages of JSA. Then finally, if he hadn't dipped into the potential riches of the past enough, the last splash page has Khalid, the new Dr. Fate, who I am actually warming up to, especially in his interactions with Salem, the kind of retconned, invented sidekick of Dr. Fate from the Golden Age. I love kind of like their butting heads and then are interacting. But anyway, the final page has Khalid getting a visit from the future. The Legion of Substitute Heroes has come, saying that they need his help in the 31st century. And I'm like, what? This is such a crazy left turn. And especially not only the Legion of Superheroes, but the Legion of Substitute Heroes. I remember way back in the day, I had this Reader's Digest style, small size trade paperback of a bunch of Legion of Superheroes story. And it happened to feature the origin of the Legion of Substitute Heroes. And there was something about it that I just loved, like Stone Boy, for example, who's actually featured on this page, who can become completely, indestructible, but when he does that, he's in this frozen stone form. So it's not like he can get in fisticuffs and be in a big fight. He's just stuck in whatever pose he turned to stone in until he reverts back to his soft, fleshy form. So they've all got these powers that, if you get clever with them, could be really cool, but at a glance are just like, these are just some lame powers. And DC over the years, especially if you take the Flash as an example, writers have found ways to take heroes with seemingly one-note powers and really use them in clever ways that expand them and actually show those characters and their capabilities to be much more extensive and interesting than you would have thought at a glance. And I have long thought never mentioned this. I thought, man, who even knows who Stone Boy is? But I've long thought that Stone Boy, if he gets really good at changing to stone and reverting back, could really make great use of being indestructible, even though he's in a frozen pose, while he is such. So anyway, I can't wait to see what Jeff Johns might do with these characters from the Legion of Substitute Heroes. So anyway, yeah, I just feel like this is Jeff Johns at his best, doing what I love him best for, and I can't wait for the next issue of Justice Society of America. Finally, Jay Garrick, The Flash, really been enjoying that, the start of this series written by Jeremy Adams, and it's bringing some of his his lightfulness, his what's the word I'm looking for? Playfulness, his positivity, I guess, to the pages of Flash, as he did with his Wally West run. There is some cheesiness that's coming along with it. They're fighting this villain Robert that I think is brought back. I don't know if he was actually in the Golden Age or not, but clearly this is part of the new Golden Age initiative where they're bringing back and shedding new light on realities from the Golden Age, and that involves a lot of retconning, which, as a general rule, I don't have a problem with. I can enjoy it quite a bit. There might be some choices here and there that I'm like, oh, that particular retcon or change I'm not a fan of, but in general, I like successful attempts at bringing freshness and a new perspective to previous time periods in DC Comics. And so, and I like how there are kind of two sources of drama and tension in this story. One being that Judy, Jay's daughter, is back in the wife of Jay and his wife, whose name is escaping me at the moment. But back in their lives, they're trying to figure out how to be parents again, and trying to figure out what the boundaries should be. Their instinct is to be overly protective because they lost their daughter for so long, forgot she even existed. Now they have her back, but at the same time, they did age for a while after she disappeared, and they both remember raising her, but then they also had this gap where they were not parents for a while. So they're adjusting again to being parents, and older parents at that. So I just appreciate those kind of ground level, more relatable sources of drama. But at the same time, there's this evil brewing that seems to be behind a lot of this resurgence of Golden Age characters. That's sort of exemplified in this final scene against Robert as he's being defeated. He says, "Everything that is old is new again." And then he says he'll see you and your daughter soon. So we don't know who he is. We've had maybe some little hints in the first issue, or maybe it was some other stuff in part of this new Golden Age initiative. I can't remember. But there's some big villain that's behind the scenes, and Robert gets teleported away. We don't know any more than what he said. But Judy turns to her dad with a worried expression and says, "Dad, what is going on?" And so I love the relatable family drama, but also the the more comic booky types of drama and tension with a family relating to each other in that context. And so, yeah, I'm really liking Jay Garrick, The Flash, and looking forward to the next issue of this one as well. Now, if you happen to be watching the video version of this, you might have noticed that I'm wearing a blue lantern ring. I want to just give a shout out to Matt McKinney, who is a longtime supporter of Christian Geek Central content, and he got in touch with me and sent me a complete set as a Christmas present of the full spectrum of lantern rings, which I had given up on trying to collect myself years ago, and he got his hands on a set and sent them to me. So thank you so much, Matt. And I was thinking I should do some dorky kind of gimmick and bring these into my Essential Issues weekly content in some way. And so I don't know how consistent I'm going to be, but my thought right now is, after kind of sharing my thoughts on the week's comics, I'll share why I'm wearing one particular ring as the representation of kind of like my summary thought or summary feelings after kind of reading the comics of the week. And so very appropriately, I'm wearing the blue ring representing hope, because all three of these comics, Wonder Woman 3, Justice Society of America 7, and Jay Garrick the Flash 2, make me very hopeful for what I'm going to be seeing in these comic books going forward. This was, there were plenty of comics I didn't talk about that were also released in December that didn't interest me, but my focus this time at least was on these three comics that I really did enjoy, and that I feel like give me reason to hope that I'll continue to enjoy each of them as they go forward. But anyway, those are all of my thoughts on comic books for now. What are you thinking of this initiative for the new Golden Age? What things are you liking or disliking, or what about these three comics has really kind of got your attention? I would love to get your thoughts and reactions, as always, in the comments below. Remember to check out christiangeekcentral.com again for tons more content. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.